Thank you for joining us for the third part of our biblical series story on how not to misread and misunderstand the Bible. So, Brendan.
Yeah, you mentioned how the Bible is divided into different acts, and I noticed one of the acts was called Israel's Quest. And now that sounds Indiana Jonesy to me, kind of Lord of the Rings. It sounds epic. So Can you kind of explain that in a little more detail?
Well, it is an epic story. I mean, it's probably the most significant story,
human history,
over several centuries that's recorded. But just by way of review from what we said in the last video, that the story of the Bible is God restoring that which is broken. Taking creation, which was created good, Act 1. Act 2, from Genesis 3 to 12, is the brokenness that is just several exiles, several movements away from God's presence and home, from the Tower of Babel to the flood, of course, the original fall in the garden. And then in Genesis 12, God takes one man, and he says, from you will come a great nation, and that nation will bless the entire world. And that is Abraham, and the great nation will become Israel, which under Moses is about 600,000 people in Egypt, and he lived somewhere over, was about 400 years after the time of Abraham. And so for 1,400 years, that nation, Israel, is given God's laws, God's temple, the worship, the presence of God, the land of God in Israel, but most of all, the promise of a Messiah coming who will restore the brokenness of the earth, who will bring peace, who will bring prosperity, who will make things abundant where there's scarcity, who will remove disease, who will, again, as we said, restore that which is broken. And so Israel was that bridge, was that pathway, was the chosen people for all of the nations to receive that.
So you're saying Israel was on a quest to save all of mankind?
Yes, wow. They were. And they realized it was going to be through the Messiah, but they were, caretakers, trustees, stewards of that promise, if you will. It was going to be through them that it would come.
That's more of an epic quest than Tolkien could ever write,
I think so, yes.
Yeah. So shifting gears a little bit, what would you say to people who say that the God of the Old Testament is unnecessarily harsh? I mean, he seems to do a lot of brutal things in the Old Testament. So how would you reconcile that or explain that?
Well, I would first of all say that the God of the, I remember doing a study of every book. I taught through every book of the Old Testament and the New. But as I taught through every single book of the Old Testament, it became very clear to me that this God is a God of love and grace, of forbearance, of patience, of love, as it says in I believe it's in Exodus, 32. God says, "I am compassionate, I am gracious, blessing, 1,000 generations," but then bringing punishment, on the sin of people, to the third and fourth generation. So he wants to bless 1,000 generations, but he'll take 3 to 4 generations to correct that which is wrong. And so in the Old Testament, because so much is placed upon the nation of Israel, so much responsibility, so much blessing, they are so crucial to the history of God restoring the world. When they are out of line, when they are moving off track, when they are off target, God brings his judgment. God brings his correction, and sometimes it's harsh. But sometimes that's what is needed. But whenever he does bring his judgment, he still promises to love them, to discipline them, and bring them into restoration. But the reason he's that way is because so much is dependent upon this nation. Furthermore, God is establishing his holiness. God is establishing worship and respect. And as I've said many times before, the foundation of love is respect. And if you don't respect somebody, if you don't honor somebody, you don't love them. You don't learn how to. And just like as a parent, you learn very early on that with your children, you better establish your authority, not friendship. Right. And so God establishes his authority. And then when Jesus comes, Jesus says, "No longer do I call you servants, but I call you friends." And so as I have my sons and even daughters in college, and we get together for, cookouts and different activities. They're my friends. I'm not there to correct them. I am their dad, but we're in friendship because they've matured. But early on,
Right.
I had to establish my authority, and I had to correct and bring discipline
Same
and
with
do
them.
that. But it was the same love that, expressed itself in discipline is the same love that, as they matured, expressed itself in friendship. And it's the exact same way with God. There's no difference whatsoever. There's just difference in his relation, to the maturity of Israel and to where the world's at, and being able to be restored.
Exactly. I like that. I like that comparison in the blog of, how you have to raise a kid and how you can't always be their buddy. You gotta lay down the law a little bit for them to mature, and then you can then enjoy that.
Well, you have to lay down the law a little more than a little bit. So, I can tell you that much. So.
Yeah. I'm aware. I had the law laid down on me when I was a kid, so I'm well aware.
Likewise.
So then, what would you say to someone who claims that Jesus is radically different from the God of the Old Testament?
Well, again, it's what we've been saying. People don't understand the Old Testament. They're speaking out of ignorance, and the God of the Old Testament is gracious and loving. One Jewish rabbi had asked his students the question, looking from an Old Testament perspective, who is the most tragic figure in the Old Testament? And people would say things like Absalom, David's son, or other tragic figures. And according to this rabbi, they were wrong because God is the most tragic figure. He pours and pours and pours and pours love and grace and mercy and blessing upon his people, but they always continue rejecting him. And they did so even up to the point of Jesus Christ. And we see that God's people in the Old Testament were just as sinful and needed just as much salvation as those that were pagans around the Jewish people. But still God loves them and calls them his people and still uses them to bless the nations of the world. And when Jesus Christ comes and then the gospel goes forward through the apostles, the Jews are given preferential treatment because of God's distinct love for them. And Jesus then comes and expresses this fully, and it becomes a more technicolor clarity when we see Jesus Christ. And so Jesus himself continued to say, I and the Father are one. I do the works that the Father has sent me to do. He's continually referring back to the Old Testament, seeing himself in that pattern. The apostles are saying that all the things that were written in the past were written for our benefit, and they see no distinction, but they draw parallels, to our practice in the New Covenant from the Old Covenant, because it is the same God with the same intention, and that is bringing restoration to a broken world. They were just in a different phase than we are.
Mm-hmm. It's a story of grace.
Yes,
there.
It is. That's the name of my blog.
Yes.
So, yes.
Thank you for joining Anthony and I today on the Biblical Story video series. Please subscribe to the Crossroads CCO YouTube channel, like, and share this video. Until next time.